poor wife walks in on Millionaire proposing to Mistress. What she does next will shock you. When Maria Delgado pushed open the ornate doors to the private dining room, she was expecting a quiet evening with her millionaire husband, Jacob. Instead, she found him kneeling before another woman, an extravagant ring poised between his trembling fingers. In that split second, her world shattered like delicate porcelain dropped from a great height. Emotions warred inside her: shock, betrayal, fury. But what Maria did next defied every expectation. The consequences of that decisive moment would reverberate through high society circles, revealing secret alliances, shattered trust, and a woman's quest to carve her own destiny out of the chaos her husband had unleashed. Maria Delgado had been raised to believe in the power of love. Born in a modest suburb of Philadelphia, she'd spent her childhood studying hard, watching her parents work long hours, and learning the value of perseverance. Love, in her eyes, was meant to be honorable, a sacred promise that transcended time and adversity. So, when she married Jacob Delgado, an unassuming man at the time, who later skyrocketed to wealth, she believed their union was fated. Everything about Jacob back then spoke of ambition tempered by warmth, a thirst for success supported by a deep devotion to her. They married in their mid-20s, beginning with a modest apartment in downtown Philadelphia. While he climbed the rungs of the real estate development world, Maria supported them both by teaching music lessons to neighborhood kids. She beamed with pride each time Jacob closed a deal that brought them a step closer to his dream, building an empire. Through the nascent years of their marriage, every victory was shared. Every setback was consoled by the other. The couple felt invincible. As Jacob's fortunes grew, so did his interests, and the city seemed too small for his evolving ambitions. With the promise of even greater success, he uprooted them to New York. Over time, he transformed from the modest man Maria once knew into someone revered by the upper echelons of Manhattan's elite. He became known for orchestrating multi-million-dollar real estate ventures. Their modest apartment turned into a lavish penthouse overlooking Central Park. From dressing in simple button-down shirts to adorning himself in bespoke suits from Savile Row, Jacob thrived in the glitz and glamour of high society life. Maria was proud of him, of course. But with each acquisition, each expansion, each lavish party thrown by Manhattan's wealthy set, she began to sense something intangible slipping away. The sweet, humble spark in Jacob's eyes was being replaced by a relentless desire for more. Their shared dinners became fewer and fewer. Their conversations, once intimately about dreams and daily life, revolved around boardroom strategies and the constant hum of new deals. Where there was once closeness, an unspoken chasm was opening. Still, Maria was no stranger to sacrifice. She believed that a marriage demanded effort and understanding. She accepted that his time was consumed by meetings, power lunches with foreign investors, and charity galas where he networked. She made space for his blossoming empire and refused to let suspicion take root. If he was distant, she told herself, it was because he was tired. If his phone rang at odd hours, it was because that was how the real estate world worked. She clung to the memory of that earnest young man who held her hand in their first tiny kitchen, dreaming of a brighter future together. But all illusions can shatter. Late one evening, after one of his countless events, Jacob casually mentioned that he wanted to take her to an exclusive restaurant the next night. Belafonte's, perched high above the city with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the sparkling skyline. Maria's heart fluttered. A private dinner just for them, exactly what they needed to revive their bond. She felt a spark of hope that maybe their relationship could rekindle, that the old Jacob would re-emerge, if only for a night. The following day, she dressed with care in a flowing, emerald green gown. She recalled how green was Jacob's favorite color on her, how he'd often say her eyes looked like precious jewels when she wore it. She left their penthouse with trembling excitement, not wanting to arrive too early, but also conscious that the invitation had felt momentous, like something significant was in store. When she reached the restaurant, an attentive maitre d' greeted her by name and led her down a corridor to a discreet, gold-trimmed door. Soft piano music flowed from within. Her heart pounded, imagining a candlelit room just for the two of them. Instead, as the door swung open, she stumbled upon a scene she could never have prepared for. Jacob, down on one knee, proposing to a statuesque blonde woman, his mistress, whose face Maria recognized from hushed rumors at parties and unconfirmed gossip in tabloids. The ring in Jacob's hand sparkled like a fallen star, captured by the overhead chandelier's light. Time froze, capturing her shock, the mistress's gasp, and Jacob's horrified expression in an excruciating tableau. Maria felt dizzy, her sense of reality splintering. Memories of their simple days in Philadelphia flooded her mind. Her hands shook as she clutched the handle of the door for support. She sensed the maitre d' quickly slip away, likely to avoid the pending explosion. The look on Jacob's face rapidly morphed from romantic fervor to utter panic. How long has this been going on? Maria finally managed to choke out, voice trembling. The blonde woman, Annalise Winslow, as Maria would later learn, stepped back, her hand protectively covering the ring that Jacob had tried to slip on her finger. She had a deer-in-headlights look, as if she had expected this moment, but not in such a brutal collision of truths. "Maria," Jacob began, rising slowly from his knee, "it's not what it looks like." A pit of molten anger rose in Maria's chest. The anguish burned, pried open by betrayal. She glanced at the ring Jacob was holding. It wasn't a tiny diamond. It was a massive rock, overshadowing the modest ring she herself had worn with pride for years. Everything about this was a sickening confirmation of what she had refused to suspect. She refused to let him see her crumble, her eyes brimming with unshed tears locked onto Jacob's. "For once in your life," she said, voice trembling yet steel-edged, "tell me the truth." Jacob glanced between Maria and Annalise. Shame flickered across his expression, but only for a moment before resolve set in. In a voice that cracked, he said, "I was going to explain it after this. I never wanted you to find out this way." He was trying to speak gently, but Maria found it galling. Here, in a lavish, private dining room that cost more per meal than some people earned in a month, her husband was kneeling before another woman with an engagement ring. Her world felt false, illusions shattered like shards of broken glass. But instead of running, instead of screaming or hurling every insult she could muster, Maria inhaled. She decided then and there that she wouldn't collapse. Not now, not ever. With a composure that surprised even herself, she said, "Fine." She tugged off her wedding band, the simple gold band that had once symbolized their hopeful union. She placed it gently on the nearest table, right next to a silver platter meant for some extravagant dinner. She looked at Annalise, whose cheeks had gone pale. "Congratulations," Maria said icily. "You've caught a big fish. I hope you both choke on it." She turned on her heel, ignoring Jacob's pleas for her to wait. She walked out with her head held high, tears threatening to fall, but refusing to let them out until she was out of that stifling, perfumed environment. Little did either of them know, Maria's next actions would set off a chain reaction of hidden truths, corporate betrayals, and unexpected alliances that would ultimately turn the power dynamics of their world on its head. Maria spent the night at a friend's townhouse near Gramercy Park. This friend, Jennifer Robertson, was one of the few people Maria trusted implicitly. Jennifer, a lawyer by profession, had seen far too many wealthy husbands try to con their wives out of rightful settlements. In the warmly lit living room, Maria recounted the horrifying scene. Jennifer listened quietly, her arms folded, eyes flashing indignation at Jacob's betrayal. When Maria finally finished, the tears she had held back since the restaurant began to slide down her cheeks. Jennifer promptly pulled her into a hug. "Maria," she murmured, "this is terrible, but you're not going through it alone. This time, you have to look out for yourself." Maria sniffled, still reeling. "I never thought. All those business trips, all those late nights." Jennifer tightened her grip. "People like Jacob, they think they can have everything. The wife, the mistress, the image of perfection. You don't deserve that." Maria wiped her tears. A cold anger took root in her heart, overshadowing her sorrow. She had sacrificed too much, believed in Jacob too long. Perhaps she'd been naive, but there was no time left for self-pity. "What do I do?" she asked, gazing at Jennifer. "I'm not going to just let him throw me away." Jennifer pursed her lips, then reached for her phone. "First, we need to call Patrick Hodges, one of the top divorce attorneys in New York. He'll know exactly what to do. The Delgado empire might have been built by Jacob, but you've stood beside him every step of the way. New York law won't ignore that." For hours into the night, they planned. Jennifer explained the complexities of high-asset divorces, the myriad ways spouses try to hide money. They dissected the financial empire Jacob had built, the real estate ventures, the offshore accounts rumored by some to exist, the charity foundations that he might use as tax shelters. Maria listened, took notes, and found her heartbreak morphing into a dogged determination. If Jacob thought he could so brazenly propose to another woman, he was in for a rude awakening. The next morning, Maria woke from a fitful sleep. She rose, showered, and dressed in a simple black outfit. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes rimmed with sadness, yet also lit by an undercurrent of resolve. She thought about that shocking moment in the restaurant. It had been mere hours since her life was turned inside out, yet it felt like an eternity. An unexpected wave of curiosity washed over her. What kind of woman was Annalise Winslow, beyond the honey-blonde hair and designer gown? How long had Annalise waited in the wings for Jacob to propose? Maria's mind churned with possibilities. Was she manipulated by Jacob's power, or was she the manipulator? Determined to cut through the speculation, Maria decided she wanted facts. She dialed a private investigator's number, someone recommended by Jennifer. A man named Richard Pine, known in certain circles for his thorough, discreet approach. Maria remembered meeting him briefly at a philanthropic event. He'd been introduced to her as the best man to find what's hidden. If there was dirt to be dug up, Richard Pine could unearth it. Within an hour, Maria was sitting in a small, upscale coffee shop near Union Square. Face to face with Richard, he was a sturdy man in his mid-50s, with kind but calculating eyes. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Delgado?" he asked in a measured tone, sipping his espresso. Maria inhaled slowly. "I found my husband proposing to another woman last night," she said, voice unwavering. "I need to know everything about her, her background, her motivations, any skeletons in her closet." Richard set down his cup, making the slightest grimace. "I'm sorry to hear that. Cheating spouses are unfortunately too common in my line of work. But let's talk specifics. What do you already know about this woman?" "Her name is Annalise Winslow. I believe she's from Los Angeles originally. She's in her mid-20s, definitely younger than me or Jacob. Rumor has it she used to be a model, or maybe a socialite. I'm not entirely sure." Richard nodded, scribbling notes. "Understood. I'll compile everything I can find. Miss Winslow's finances, connections, travel history, job history, whatever might help. And I assume you also want me to keep an eye on Jacob's dealings?" He lifted an eyebrow knowingly. "Yes," Maria replied firmly. "I have a strong feeling there's more to this than just an affair." I want to know if he's been hiding money or if he's planning to move assets out of the country. Anything that can help me get some measure of justice when we go to court, or even before that." Richard nodded again. "I'll be in touch soon." Maria thanked him and left, feeling that with each step she was moving deeper into a labyrinth where she had to be the one calling the shots. She wasn't merely a scorned wife, she was becoming an orchestrator of her own destiny. By afternoon, Maria knew she could no longer avoid returning to the penthouse. She needed her clothes, her documents, her life. She braced herself for the confrontation that was inevitable. Summoning what courage she had, she took a taxi to the towering building that had once felt like a dream come true. Its gleaming marble lobby now felt foreign. She ascended in the private elevator, her heart pounding, stomach in knots. As she slid the keycard and the doors to the penthouse opened, she heard Jacob's voice carrying down the corridor. To her surprise, he wasn't alone. She recognized the female voice, Annalise. They seemed to be arguing. Maria took a moment to listen. Through the grand foyer, she could make out the two silhouettes in the living area. She heard Annalise's voice, tight with anger. "You said you'd handle this differently. Now everyone's talking about it like some scandal. How do you think this makes me look?" Jacob hissed back. "You think I planned for Maria to walk in? God, Annalise, I'm juggling a million things. The board at Delgado Holdings is going to be furious if this leaks to the press. This was supposed to be discreet." Maria felt a twinge of savage satisfaction, hearing the cracks form in their alliance. With her shoulders set, she stepped forward, letting her heels clack on the polished floor. Jacob and Annalise whirled around, identical expressions of shock distorting their features. "Maria," Jacob started, lifting a hand in an entreaty, but Maria's gaze was locked onto Annalise. Up close, the mistress was undeniably striking tall, poised with carefully styled waves of golden hair. Yet Maria noticed a flicker of insecurity behind that controlled exterior. "Good," she thought. "I'm not the only one rattled. I just came to get my things," Maria said plainly. "Then I'll leave, and you two can celebrate your engagement in peace." Annalise's shoulders relaxed, but her eyes narrowed in faint challenge. Jacob stepped forward. "Maria, wait. I think we should talk." She laughed mirthlessly. "Talk? That's what you wanted to do? You were going to propose to her, Jacob. Don't pretend there's any middle ground here. And honestly, what do I have to say to you? Congratulations." Jacob's jaw tightened. "It's not that simple." "Actually, it is," Maria snapped, her emotions flaring. "You made a choice, a public choice no less. I can't undo that, and I won't be your doormat." Annalise crossed her arms, lips pressed together, as though restraining herself from retorting. Maria caught the fleeting glance she gave Jacob, some mixture of fear and entitlement. It dawned on Maria that Annalise may have feared losing the security Jacob's fortune promised. The scorned wife's presence in the penthouse complicated matters for the mistress, who presumably dreamed of living here in style. "Just take whatever you need," Jacob said after a moment. "We don't need to fight in front of her." Maria's chest constricted, memories of 1,000 shared moments in this home swirling in her mind. But she suppressed the pain and moved calmly to the master bedroom, which was filled with expensive furnishings and the faint scent of the cologne Jacob once gifted her. She methodically packed a suitcase with her clothes and personal items. Her fingertips lingered on a framed photo of them in front of their first store-bought Christmas tree, back in their humble Philadelphia apartment. She set it aside, not wanting to carry something so laden with nostalgia. As she re-entered the living area, she caught a glimpse of Annalise's engagement ring glinting in the afternoon light. Rage flared again, but she forced composure, reminding herself that she had a plan. Once she had everything she needed, she paused at the door, turning back to them. "Jacob," she said, "I've asked Patrick Hodges to represent me. If you want to avoid a scorched earth divorce, I suggest you speak to your attorney. Analyze's eyes flared at the mention of divorce. Possibly, it hammered home the reality that Maria wasn't just going to vanish quietly. Jacob's face fell. He tried to speak, but words failed him. In that charged silence, Maria left. She felt hollow, but also strangely empowered. The woman who had walked in on her husband's betrayal mere hours ago was no longer the same. And what awaited her next was a labyrinth of hidden truths. Over the next week, Manhattan buzzed with rumors. The Delgado name had become a fixture of high society galas and philanthropic events. Whispers circulated through penthouse brunches, exclusive clubs, and midnight parties. Jacob Delgado had not only cheated on Maria, but had proposed to his mistress. The gossip columns ate it up. Real estate mogul's secret engagement was the headline in at least one online publication. People debated whether Maria was blindsided or complicit, whether she'd stay or go, and what the mistress was like. In the meantime, Patrick Hodges, the formidable divorce attorney, laid out a roadmap for Maria. They met in his sleek midtown office, with Jennifer present as moral support. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the hustle and bustle of Manhattan below, as though showing a world that never slept, never paused for heartbreak. "Maria," Patrick said in a calm, almost fatherly tone, "Jacob's net worth is estimated at around $700 million. We need to act fast to ensure he doesn't move assets out of reach." $700 million, Maria echoed, stunned, though she knew the figure hovered in that range. She had watched his success balloon over the years, but to hear it stated so plainly shook her. She'd never placed a dollar value on their relationship. Patrick continued, "We'll file motions to freeze a significant portion of his assets until the court rules on equitable distribution. But be ready, his legal team will fight. Also, the prenuptial agreement. We need to see if that holds up in court." Maria's brow furrowed. "We had a prenup, but it was signed before his empire expanded like this. Back then, he had almost nothing. I never thought it would come to this." Patrick flipped through documents. "Yes, it's from 15 years ago, but we have grounds to challenge it if certain conditions have changed significantly, or if you can prove undue influence or anything along those lines. After all, you supported him morally and even financially in the early years." Jennifer chimed in, "Don't forget about the potential hidden offshore accounts. Rumors are swirling that he might be moving investments to the Cayman Islands." Maria felt her insides twist. Every layer of betrayal deepened her resolve. "Let's do whatever it takes. I don't want to be cruel. I just want what's fair. But if Jacob tries to shortchange me after all I've done to help him, then I'm ready to fight." Patrick gave a firm nod. "I'll coordinate with your investigator, Richard Pine. We'll uncover any hidden income streams or suspicious accounts. In the meantime, you need to remain calm. These next few weeks will be a roller coaster." Maria exhaled. She glanced at Jennifer, who squeezed her hand. This was war, and she was prepared. Late one night, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She tapped it open and saw, "I have information about Annalise. Meet me at Calderwood Cafe, 9 am tomorrow. R.P. Richard Pine." She felt a rush of anticipation. The next morning she arrived at the cozy Calderwood Cafe, known for its artisanal pastries and discreet atmosphere. Richard sat at a corner table, leafing through a manila folder. Maria slid into the chair opposite him. "So, what have you found?" Richard leaned forward, voice low. "Quite a bit, actually. Annalise Winslow is from Los Angeles. That much is true. She started off as a pageant contestant in her teens, then moved into small-time modeling gigs, mostly promotional events. After that, she tried to break into Hollywood. She had a few minor roles, nothing significant." Maria listened intently as Richard continued. She married briefly at 19 to a man named Parker Bloom, an older talent manager. The marriage lasted less than a year, and she walked away with a sizable alimony settlement, allegations of emotional abuse from both sides, but nothing proven. After that, she moved to New York around 3 years ago. She's been living in high-end apartments, though it's unclear how she's been affording them. So she's a gold digger, Maria muttered, disgust curling in her stomach. Richard shrugged. She's adept at finding wealthy men, that much is clear. And from phone records I accessed, it seems she was seeing Jacob for at least a year before you caught them. Maria's chest clenched. A year. She felt her hands tremble momentarily. For a year, her husband had been living a double life. Go on, she prompted, forcing composure. Her finances are shaky. She maintains appearances, but she's leveraged with credit card debt, living off gifts from older boyfriends. I also found something else, some suspicion that she was previously connected to a money laundering scheme. Though nothing concrete enough for an arrest, she's cunning. She knows how to navigate the wealthy circles and keep her secrets hidden. Maria's mind spun. She pictured Annalise draped on Jacob's arm, whispering sweet words to him while systematically securing her future with his money. This was no mere fling. This was a calculated move by an opportunist. It didn't absolve Jacob, he was equally to blame, a grown man who should have seen the red flags. But it changed how Maria viewed the dynamic. How can I use this information, she asked. Richard folded his hands. Your legal team can introduce this as evidence that Annalise might be pushing Jacob to move assets, or that she might have a questionable background that affects the case. While it doesn't directly influence your divorce settlement, it can shed light on Jacob's credibility and motives. Maria nodded slowly. Thank you, Richard. This is incredibly helpful. She closed the folder, feeling her spirits lift for a moment. This was more than just heartbreak. Now it was a mission to protect herself from two cunning players. She had let love blind her to Jacob's changes, but she would not let it blind her to her own future. While the divorce proceedings were set in motion, Jacob Delgado faced a crisis of his own. The Delgado Holdings Board of Directors had caught wind of the scandal. The reason? A major investor, Keiji Nakamura, who had planned to pour hundreds of millions into Delgado Holdings' new project, was now hesitant. The fiasco with Jacob's personal life signaled instability at the helm, and big money despises instability. A week later, in the elegant conference room at Delgado Holdings headquarters, Jacob was grilled by the board. The walls were lined with modern art, and the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. But the tension inside was palpable. Men and women in suits, representing some of the largest financial institutions, demanded answers. Board member Regina Charles, a tough-as-nails executive with silver-streaked hair, eyed Jacob coldly. "We're not here to judge your personal decisions," she began, "but your behavior is affecting our business." Mr. Nakamura is spooked. He stalled negotiations because he doesn't like the negative press associated with your, shall we say, public affair. Jacob attempted a confident posture. "We can handle this," he said. "Nakamura's concerns are about the stability of the company. I can assure you Delgado Holdings is stronger than ever." Regina's sharp gaze didn't waver. "Your wife, Maria Delgado, has been a visible figure at charitable events linked to this company. She was involved, albeit unofficially, in several philanthropic partnerships. Her departure in such a scandalous way raises questions. We need to ensure no crisis of confidence escalates." Jacob felt his insides tighten. The narrative was twisting. Maria was no longer just his wife. She was an extension of the brand he had built. He stifled the desire to lash out at the board's insinuation that his personal life was fair game. Instead, he insisted, I'm working on controlling the narrative. We'll handle the press. And as for Maria, once the divorce is settled, we can present a unified, amicable front. Regina's lips formed a thin line. Jacob, we hired a PR team. They've strongly advised that we do damage control before the next shareholders' meeting. That might involve statements from both you and Maria, something to quell rumors of a messy divorce that could sabotage investor confidence. Besides, have you considered the ramifications if Miss Delgado takes you to the cleaners financially? Jacob's frustration peaked. I have attorneys for that, he snapped. We'll handle it. The rest of the board members exchanged looks. One of them, Arnold Powell, tried to lighten the tone. Look, we just need reassurance that Delgado Holdings won't implode from a personal scandal. If you can't get it under control, we might have to explore leadership changes. That was the ultimate threat, a coup at his own company. Jacob forced a smile that didn't touch his eyes. There will be no need for that. Trust me. As the meeting adjourned, Jacob was left alone for a moment. His reflection in the glossy surface of the boardroom table looked older, more stressed. He thought of Maria's eyes the last time he saw her, brimming with betrayal. Then he thought of Annalise, upset with the negative attention. For the first time, he questioned if the precarious web he'd spun was worth the cost. But it was too late. The avalanche had already begun. In a twist that neither Maria nor Jacob could have predicted, help came from an unexpected quarter, Jacob's estranged sister, Daniela Delgado. She had parted ways with the family years earlier, after disagreeing with Jacob on a major business decision that led to a bitter falling out. Since then, Daniela had built her own path, creating a successful interior design firm. She'd always admired Maria's kindness from afar and held contempt for Jacob's ruthless ambition. Out of the blue, Daniela reached out to Maria. She called one evening while Maria was reviewing documents with Jennifer. Maria, this is Daniela, Jacob's sister. Maria's initial shock shifted into curiosity. Yes, Daniela. The first remember you. We haven't spoken in ages. Look, Daniela said. I heard about what happened. I don't blame you if you don't want to talk. But I have information about a couple of major real estate deals. Jacob's been working on things that might be relevant to your divorce. If you're interested, meet me at the Silverwood Lounge tomorrow night at 8. Maria hesitated. Jacob had mentioned Daniela only rarely, and it was always laced with bitterness. Yet something told her Daniela might be sincere. I'll be there, she said, surprising even herself. The next night, Maria walked into the Silverwood Lounge, a chic bar with velvet drapes and soft jazz music. Daniela, a petite woman with sharp features, waved from a corner booth. She wore a stylish black suit and maintained a guarded expression. Thank you for meeting me, Daniela said, offering a polite nod as Maria sat down. Maria studied Jacob's sister. I'm surprised you reached out. Jacob never said good things about you. Daniela smirked. Likewise. He painted you as the obedient wife who turned a blind eye to his shadier deals. But I knew that wasn't you. We might not have been close, but I always saw your kindness. Now, about his real estate dealings. She opened her handbag and pulled out a USB drive. These are documents that point to a series of shell companies linked to Delgado Holdings. I suspect he's been funneling money offshore. Years back, he tried to get me to help launder funds through interior design contracts. I refused, and that's partly why we fell out. He threatened me to keep quiet. Maria's eyes widened. She carefully took the USB drive. If these documents were legitimate, they could be a game changer. Why help me now? Daniela's eyes flickered with something akin to regret. Because Jacob's arrogance has gone too far. He's forgotten family loyalty and moral boundaries. If he wants to destroy you, the one decent aspect of his life, I won't stand for it. And, to be transparent, I want him to face consequences for all the times he's bullied and blackmailed anyone who stood in his way. Maria tucked the USB drive into her purse. She studied Daniela carefully, trying to gauge sincerity. "Thank you," she said eventually. "I'll have my lawyer look at this. I appreciate your honesty." Daniela gave a single nod. "Just be careful. He'll retaliate if he feels cornered. Jacob Delgado is still my brother, and I know what he's capable of." Fear nudged at Maria's heart, but it was overshadowed by her determination. She swore to herself that she wouldn't let fear rule her anymore. Jacob had shattered her trust and flaunted his betrayal in a way that threatened her entire future. She wouldn't stand idly by. While Maria gathered information, Annalise Winslow was not idle. She realized Jacob was in a precarious position. The negative press, the board's dissatisfaction, and now the looming divorce threatened to erode the luxurious future she had counted on. In whispered phone calls, she pressed Jacob to finalize their engagement, to secure her name in the Delgado fortune before it slipped away. Yet Jacob delayed, promising to fix everything first. Uncertain of Jacob's ability to protect her interests, Annalise took matters into her own hands. She arranged a private lunch with one of Jacob's longtime associates, a banker named Charles Montclair. He was known to handle offshore transactions for Delgado Holdings. At a chic bistro on the Upper East Side, she met Charles in a secluded corner. "Jacob trusts you, right?" she asked, swirling her wineglass. She wore a designer dress, exuding confidence, even though her heart pounded with nerves. Charles nodded slowly. "We've done business together for years." Annalise leaned forward, letting her voice drop to a conspiratorial whisper. "Good, because I want to guarantee that if things go south, I'm protected." Charles raised an eyebrow. "That's a tall order." Jacob keeps his financial dealings close to the vest. A sly smile tugged at Annalise's lips. "I'm sure he does. But I also know Delgado Holdings is possibly moving money in ways that aren't entirely above board. If you help me get a piece of the pie quietly, I'll make it worth your while. I have connections in L.A. that might interest you." Charles swallowed. He was no stranger to morally dubious requests, but this was bolder than most. Still, money talked. "What do you propose?" "I propose you set me up with an offshore account. A small percentage of whatever Jacob moves. I don't care if it's 1 million or 10 million, as long as I have something to fall back on. In return, I'll keep my mouth shut if the authorities come knocking." Charles looked uneasy. He glanced around to ensure no one was listening. This could be risky. "But I'll see what I can do." Annalise nodded, leaning back with a smug satisfaction. She felt a thrill at the prospect of securing her own fortune. She was tired of waiting for Jacob to deliver. If he was going to let his empire crumble, she'd salvage what she could. The divorce proceedings accelerated. Under the scrutiny of Patrick Hodges, Jacob's lawyers tried every trick in the book. They argued that the prenuptial agreement limited Maria's entitlement to a fraction of the current fortune. But Patrick introduced evidence that Maria's early support had directly facilitated Jacob's meteoric rise. Financial experts testified about intangible contributions, spousal support, and the validity of a prenup signed under potentially misleading circumstances. Behind closed doors, settlement negotiations were intense. One afternoon, in a wood-paneled conference room in the courthouse, Maria and Jacob faced each other while their lawyers sparred over details. The tension was suffocating. Jacob's lead attorney, Garrett Rhodes, glared over his wire-rimmed glasses. "My client is offering a significant settlement, $20 million. That's more than generous, given the prenuptial agreement." Maria's lawyer, Patrick, shot back. $20 million is a pittance compared to the Delgado empire. My client deserves equitable distribution, especially in light of the new evidence we'll be presenting about hidden assets. Garrett stiffened. What evidence? Patrick laid out the file containing Daniela's USB drive findings, shell companies, suspicious transfers, and potential tax evasion. Maria noticed Jacob's face flush with anger. She held his gaze, refusing to back down. "If you don't want the courts delving into these matters," Patrick said calmly, "it would be wise to offer a fair settlement and quickly." Garrett looked to Jacob, who cleared his throat. "This is ridiculous," Jacob muttered. "Maria, we can handle this privately. Let's not blow up everything we built." Maria's anger flared. "We didn't build anything together anymore, Jacob. You destroyed that. I just want what I'm legally entitled to, nothing less." Before Jacob could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, features hardening. "Excuse me," he said, rising and stepping outside. Maria exchanged a look with her lawyer, who gave her a reassuring nod. She felt a pang in her chest, remembering the man she once loved. But she'd come too far to yield. Moments later, Jacob returned, face grim. "There's a situation at Delgado Holdings. I need to attend to it. We'll resume this later." He left with Garrett, leaving an uncomfortable silence behind. Patrick exhaled and turned to Maria. "He's rattled. That's good. But we need to keep the pressure on." She nodded, her mind swirling with possibilities. Jacob had always thrived under pressure, but this was a new realm of stress, public scandal, bored dissatisfaction, a vengeful sister revealing his secrets, a cunning mistress, and a betrayed wife fighting back. If anyone understood the Empire's vulnerability, it was Maria, and now she had no reason to protect it. Jacob discovered what the phone call was about. Keiji Nakamura had officially withdrawn his large investment due to the ongoing negative publicity and internal instability at Delgado Holdings. The blow was catastrophic. Stocks dipped, the board was livid, rumors of a hostile takeover circulated. Jacob's once iron grip on his empire was loosening. In the days that followed, tabloids feasted on fresh gossip. Leaked whispers suggested that Jacob's mistress was demanding a rush wedding and that the Delgado board was considering a forced resignation if the crisis continued. Jacob's face, once glowing with ambition, now appeared haggard. The carefully curated facade of success was crumbling faster than he could salvage it. At Annalise's insistence, Jacob tried to offer her a lavish ceremony in some exotic locale, hoping a quick marriage might quell some rumors and secure her unwavering support. But the board frowned at any attempt that would further sensationalize his personal life. An internal power struggle erupted, with some directors pressuring Jacob to step down temporarily. Regina Charles especially had sharpened her stance, aligning with a faction that believed Delgado Holdings needed a new figurehead to reassure investors. In a desperate bid to maintain control, Jacob made a public statement. Cameras flashed as he stepped before a cluster of reporters outside the Delgado Holdings headquarters. He wore a dark suit, face set in an expression of forced calm. "I would like to address recent speculations regarding my personal life," he began, voice subdued. "I am currently going through a divorce process, and I request privacy and respect during this challenging time. Delgado Holdings remains strong, and we are fully committed to our ongoing projects. The unfortunate withdrawal of Mr. Nakamura's investment does not diminish our stability." He continued with corporate platitudes, but the reporters clamored for more personal answers. "What about the mistress? Are you engaged already?" one asked. Jacob ignored it, reading from his carefully prepared statement. But the damage was done. In the public's eye, he was the faithless millionaire with something to hide. Watching the coverage from Jennifer's townhouse, Maria felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and sorrow. She had loved that man once. Now he was a stranger, fighting to keep illusions intact. But illusions always come at a price. She reminded herself of that truth. As the divorce hearing approached, tension reached a fever pitch. Patrick Hodges received a call from Garrett Rhodes, requesting a private meeting, just the lawyers and their clients, with no media or court officials. Maria and Jennifer drove to the law firm's office, hearts pounding. They were ushered into a sleek conference room. Jacob, Garrett, Patrick, and a stone-faced Annalise were already seated around a polished table. Maria ignored the pang of seeing Annalise by Jacob's side. She focused on the fact that the mistress's presence was highly unusual in a divorce negotiation. Garrett cleared his throat. "We've come with a proposition. Mr. Delgado is prepared to offer a settlement of $100 million plus the Manhattan penthouse in exchange for Miss Delgado signing a non-disclosure agreement, no further revelations about Delgado Holdings or Mr. Delgado's personal affairs. We want to handle this quietly and move on." Maria's eyes flickered. $100 million was vastly larger than the initial offer. She glanced at Patrick, who gave a subtle nod, indicating it was a substantial proposition. Yet something felt off. Her gaze slid to Annalise, who looked uncharacteristically tense. Patrick spoke up. "It's a generous offer, but we need to verify if there are no further conditions. Also, the NDA's scope must be clarified. Miss Delgado has the right to discuss her personal experiences freely." Jacob cut in, voice sharp. "I don't want my ex-wife airing dirty laundry. We sign this. We end it. Maria, you go your way, I go mine." Maria's heart raced. $100 million could secure her future, free her from the stress, and let her start anew. It was a fortune beyond her wildest imagination back when they were newlyweds sharing cheap takeout. But then her gaze settled on Annalise, who avoided eye contact. Maria recalled the shady deals and the knowledge that Delgado Holdings was unraveling behind the scenes. She realized that if she accepted the offer blindly, she might be stepping into a trap, allowing Jacob to cover up potential crimes and injustice. She licked her lips, choosing her words carefully. "Jacob, I appreciate the offer, but I won't sign anything until I'm sure you're not hiding more. I don't need your hush money if it means letting you and Annalise ruin more lives." Anger flashed in Jacob's eyes. "You're letting bitterness cloud your judgment. Think of what $100 million can do for you." Annalise finally spoke, voice hesitant. "Maria, please. There's no need to drag this out. We can all walk away with dignity." Maria almost laughed at the irony of Annalise talking about dignity. Instead, she closed her eyes, remembering the heartbreak of that night at Belafonte's. Then she thought of the fear and manipulation that might still lurk if she let Jacob walk away scot-free. "I'll consider it," she said, "but I'm not making a decision today." Garrett, Jacob's lawyer, looked frustrated. "We need an answer soon. Otherwise, we proceed to court." "Then we proceed to court," Patrick replied calmly. "We'll see you there." The tension was palpable as they stood to leave. Jacob locked eyes with Maria. "Don't do this," he said softly, an echo of the old Jacob appearing for a split second. "We can solve this quietly." She met his gaze, seeing the man she once loved drowned out by layers of betrayal. "If you had wanted things quiet, you wouldn't have proposed to your mistress in a public place." The day of the official court hearing dawned cloudy and brisk. Photographers and reporters crowded the courthouse steps. Maria arrived with Patrick, Jennifer, and a small security detail. Whispers followed her. She was no longer just a betrayed wife, she was the woman who might topple a millionaire's empire. Rumors swirled that she possessed damning evidence of fraud. Jacob and Annalise arrived separately, escorted by their own legal team. People craned their necks to catch a glimpse, cameras clicking furiously. He looked tense, shoulders stiff under his tailored suit. Annalise kept her chin high, though she lingered behind Jacob, as if wary of the scrutiny. Inside the large, wood-paneled courtroom, the judge, a stern woman named Honorable Denise Faraday, called the session to order. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. On the surface, it was a high-profile divorce, but in reality, it was a battleground for corporate secrets, personal vengeance, and heartbreak. Patrick presented Maria's case with meticulous detail, her contributions to Jacob's early success, the suspicious financial maneuvers uncovered by Daniela and Richard Pine, and the emotional distress caused by Jacob's public betrayal. Garrett rebutted by citing the prenup, painting Maria as vengeful, seeking more than she deserved. Midway through the proceedings, Patrick introduced a surprise witness, Daniela Delgado. She stepped forward, looking poised and determined. Her testimony about Jacob's shell companies, backed by email chains and financial documents, sent waves of shock through the courtroom. The tension climbed higher when she revealed that she had confronted Jacob years ago about money laundering allegations, which he had vehemently denied. When cross-examined by Garrett, Daniela stayed firm. "I have no reason to lie," she said quietly, "other than to expose wrongdoing. My brother has threatened me, but I won't be silent anymore." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jacob's face was a mask of barely contained fury. For Maria, hearing Daniela stand up for the truth was both validating and heartbreaking. This was the family she once thought she had. Then it was Annalise's turn on the stand. She was visibly nervous, glancing repeatedly at Jacob for reassurance. Under Patrick's probing questions, she admitted to the affair, to Jacob's promises of marriage, but denied any knowledge of financial misconduct. She played the part of the innocent lover, insisting she merely fell in love with a man who claimed he was divorcing his wife. Patrick pressed, "Did Mr. Delgado ever mention, even indirectly, wanting to shift funds out of the country, presumably to protect them from the plaintiff?" Annalise hesitated, swallowing hard. "Not in so many words," she finally said. He mentioned wanting to make sure his money was secure." That small admission sent a ripple through the courtroom. Jacob's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. By the time Annalise stepped down, sweat dotted her brow. She cast a fleeting glance at Jacob, who looked away. After a tense lunch recess, the court reconvened. Garrett strode to the center, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. "Your Honor, we have newly obtained evidence regarding Miss Delgado's own financial history, specifically questionable transactions in her name that raise concerns about her credibility." A hush descended. Maria's heart skipped. She had no idea what they were referring to. She quickly glanced at Patrick, who looked equally puzzled. Jennifer furrowed her brow. Could Jacob's legal team have found something contrived to discredit Maria? Garrett projected documents onto a screen. They showed wire transfers from an account titled M. Delgado to a bank in the Cayman Islands. The amounts were substantial, several $1 million. Maria was dumbfounded. She had never seen those transactions. "This is absurd," Patrick hissed. "Miss Delgado has no knowledge of these accounts. They must be fabricated," but Garrett pressed on. "Nevertheless, these documents indicate that Miss Delgado might have known about offshore practices and even participated in them. We must question her integrity and motivations." Maria's stomach churned. She realized this was a smear tactic, orchestrated to paint her as complicit or hypocritical. But how had they manufactured these records? The judge frowned, calling for order. "Miss Delgado," she addressed Maria, "do you have any knowledge of these transactions?" Maria stood, voice trembling but resolute. "None whatsoever, Your Honor. This is the first I've seen of these so-called documents. I suspect they're part of a scheme by Mr. Delgado to undermine my case." Jacob's eyes flicked toward her. Was there a flicker of regret, or just determination to win at any cost? The judge instructed further examination of the evidence, and recess was called for the day. The media outside went wild, speculating on whether Maria was truly innocent or had skeletons in her closet. That evening, As Maria regrouped with her team, she tried to steady her nerves. Jennifer cursed Jacob's low blow. Patrick immediately launched an investigation into the suspicious documents, suspecting they were forged or manipulated. Meanwhile, Maria's phone buzzed with a text from Richard Pine. "Meet me at my office tomorrow at 7 a.m. I might have found something that can flip this around." Tension thrummed within her. She realized that she was dancing on the edge of a high-stakes game, one where illusions could be crafted and destroyed in an instant. She also sensed that if she didn't play her cards right, she could lose everything. The next morning, Maria arrived at Richard Pine's unremarkable office building in Chelsea. In a modest but tidy workspace, he greeted her with a firm handshake. On his desk, he had a laptop open to a complicated spreadsheet of IP addresses and account details. "I suspected those documents introduced in court were forged," he began without preamble. "So I did a deep dive into the digital metadata of the wire transfers. Every time a wire transfer is done, there's an electronic fingerprint. Long story short, the documents we saw in court have anomalies that suggest they were fabricated." Maria felt a surge of relief but also anger at Jacob's treachery. "So it's definitely fake," Richard nodded. "Yes, and I have proof. The IP addresses associated with these transactions trace back to a shell company that's linked to Delgado Holdings. The digital watermark indicates the documents were created using a specific software license registered to that same shell company. In simpler terms, it was an inside job." Maria exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. She wanted to hug Richard, but she settled for gripping his arm. "This is exactly what we need. With this, we can prove they tried to frame me." Richard offered a faint smile. "Be careful. Jacob's cornered, and cornered people can be unpredictable. But yes, this should be enough to dismantle their smear campaign." Armed with this new evidence, Maria returned to the courthouse. Patrick introduced Richard Pine's findings, systematically debunking the false documents. The judge was furious at the apparent attempt to mislead the court. Garrett stammered that they'd obtained the documents from an anonymous source and had no knowledge of the forgery. Jacob looked livid, glancing at Annalise, who stared at the floor. The judge sternly reminded all parties that perjury and tampering with evidence carried severe consequences. In a decisive moment, she ordered a full forensic audit of Delgado Holdings' accounts. That spelled disaster for Jacob, who had spent years carefully disguising questionable dealings. It was the final straw that cracked his empire's shell wide open. When the courtroom resumed, Maria's legal team presented ironclad evidence that the so-called Cayman Islands bank statements in her name were forged. Metadata traced them back to a shell company tied to Delgado Holdings, proving Jacob's team had fabricated documents to discredit her. Furious at the deception, the judge ordered a comprehensive forensic audit of all Delgado Holdings accounts. Within days, the company's stock nosedived as investors panicked, and board members blamed Jacob for the ensuing scandal. Facing mounting pressure, they forced him to step down as CEO, leaving him humiliated and struggling to salvage his reputation. Simultaneously, Maria's divorce proceedings reached a turning point. Recognizing he was cornered by the damning audit and under threat of a potential criminal investigation, Jacob instructed his lawyer to extend a vastly improved settlement offer. Instead of the nominal amounts initially proposed, Maria now stood to receive $200 million, a portfolio of properties including the Manhattan penthouse, and an official acknowledgement of Jacob's wrongdoing. Crucially, the settlement would also include his public apology for using forged evidence against her. Desperate to minimize further legal liabilities and public shame, Jacob surrendered to every condition, though he seethed at the outcome. On the day the final documents were signed, Jacob approached Maria in the courthouse hallway. offering a halting apology that acknowledged his betrayal and, beneath that, his regret at how spectacularly he had destroyed their shared dreams. Maria accepted his words without malice, though the bond they'd once shared was irrevocably severed. Annalise Winslow did not appear. Rumours suggested she was already planning her exit, unwilling to remain at Jacob's side now that his empire was in shambles. With the divorce finalized, Maria stepped away from the chaos. Though she walked away with more money than she'd ever imagined, she remained grounded by the values her parents had instilled in her. Resolving to use her resources for good, she founded an organization to assist women rebuilding their lives after betrayal, separation, or financial struggles. Daniela, Jacob's sister, became a staunch supporter. Together, they furnished the charity's new office, forging a friendship born of mutual respect rather than shared loyalty to Jacob. Jacob's fall from grace served as a cautionary tale in Manhattan's elite circles, a parable of unchecked ambition leading to ruin. Free from his shadow, Maria embraced her next chapter on her own terms, moving into a modern penthouse across town, a space she chose herself. Not out of obligation, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Gazing at the skyline one late afternoon, she allowed the crisp air to fill her lungs, contemplating the journey that had challenged her faith in love and trust. Yet, in rising from the rubble, Maria discovered a powerful truth. Broken dreams could serve as the foundation for a more genuine, self-determined future. In the end, she transformed a devastating betrayal into an unbreakable will, resolved to live fully and authentically. Her story an enduring testament to resilience and renewal. And there you have it, the twists and turns of Maria Delgado's remarkable journey from unsuspecting wife to triumphant phoenix. She discovered the power of self-reinvention in the face of heartbreak and high-stakes drama, proving that even the deepest betrayals can ignite a fierce determination to rise. Jacob Delgado's downfall and Annalise Winslow's vanishing act became cautionary tales whispered throughout Manhattan's elite circles, while Maria's name was etched into the city's lore as a resilient survivor who refused to back down. She built a new life that honored her past but never allowed it to define her future.
Have you ever wondered how a single moment, one split second of discovery, could shatter a perfectly crafted facade? This is the story of Sarah Robertson, a devoted wife who believed in the sanctity of love and marriage, only to find herself caught in a whirlwind of betrayal when she stumbled upon her husband's mistress at his office. As she stood there, pregnant and trembling with rage, little did she know that a DNA test lurked in the shadows, poised to devastate everything she thought she knew. Brace yourself for a relentless ride of lies, secrets, and shocking twists that will leave you speechless. Sarah Robertson was no stranger to life's challenges. At 32, she had faced her fair share of heartbreak and setbacks before meeting Richard Johnson, a charismatic investment banker at Allen & Myers Financial Services. When Richard first walked into her life, he seemed to radiate stability, confidence, and a touch of old-fashioned charm. That was 5 years ago. Today, Sarah was sitting by the large bay window in their suburban home, hands resting gently on her growing belly, reflecting on the blessing she was about to bring into the world. The house itself was a symbol of their mutual hard work, a 2-story brick home with a pristine lawn and carefully chosen decor. Friends would comment on how picture-perfect their life seemed. Neighbors smiled at the sight of Sarah's baby bump waving in approval as they jogged or walked their dogs down the quiet streets. On the surface, everything looked idyllic. A glowing wife preparing a nursery, a busy husband providing for his family, and a child on the way. Yet beneath the veneer of a perfect suburban marriage lurked a subtle disquiet. It had started as the faintest flicker of doubt. Those nights Richard would come home late, without a proper explanation, or the weekends he claimed to be catching up on office work, while Sarah battled morning sickness alone. Sarah tried convincing herself it was all temporary. After all, Richard's job was demanding, and they needed to prepare financially for the baby's arrival. Their relationship had blossomed quickly. After a whirlwind romance of less than a year, they got married in an intimate ceremony on a sunny beach in Hawaii. Family and close friends witnessed their vows, tears of joy shining in their eyes. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, was the best man, a tall, boisterous fellow who loved practical jokes but had a heart of gold. Sarah's longtime confidant, Harriet Edwards, served as her maid of honor and had been the first to encourage Sarah to take a leap of faith with Richard. Shortly after the honeymoon, Sarah and Richard settled into the rhythms of daily life. Sarah, a freelance graphic designer, worked from a cozy office upstairs. Her flexible schedule allowed her to build a stable clientele while also keeping the house in order. Richard, on the other hand, thrived in the high-stakes world of finance. He could negotiate million-dollar contracts before breakfast and charm his boss into awarding him the heftiest bonuses by lunchtime. However, once Sarah became pregnant, life started shifting. What had once been a comfortable partnership turned into anxious nights and suspicious glances. Sarah found herself scrolling through Richard's social media, looking for signs of hidden messages or flirty interactions. She had yet to find concrete evidence, just a vague sense that something was off. If only she could put her finger on it, Sarah thought as she sat by the window that day. In her heart, she still hoped everything was fine, that the weight of her suspicions was merely the pressure of impending motherhood. But an unshakable feeling told her a storm was brewing, and no carefully curated suburban dream could shelter her from the downpour that was about to come. The first real hint arrived one Friday evening. Sarah was up late designing a client's logo when she heard Richard's car pull into the driveway. It was nearly midnight. Her heart fluttered with relief, but as he stepped through the front door, her relief shifted to alarm. He reeked of expensive perfume, not the kind she wore, and not the kind carried by the air of any bar she knew he frequented after work. "Hey, honey," Richard said with an attempt at casualness, removing his tie and avoiding her eyes. A faint flush crept over his cheeks. In the past, she might have blamed the cold, but it was a balmy night with barely a breeze. Sarah forced a smile. "Late night." "Yeah. We had a few urgent client meetings, then some colleagues wanted to grab drinks," he replied. He kept his explanation succinct, offering no more details than necessary. It felt rehearsed. Curiosity flamed within her. She wanted to press for more details, names of colleagues, location of the bar, but she bit her tongue, not wanting to spark an argument. Pregnancy hormones had been causing tension lately, but deep down she suspected this apprehension was something else entirely. Sarah had enough experience with heartbreak to recognize the signs of evasion. Instead, she reached for a different approach. "You hungry? I kept dinner warm." Richard shook his head. "I'm beat. I'll just shower and head to bed." As he trudged upstairs, Sarah stood rooted to the spot, trying to steady her breath. The faint floral scent of someone else's perfume lingered like a ghost in the foyer. Suspicion took root, its tendrils wrapping around her heart. That night, she lay awake, her mind a battlefield of conflicting emotions. The next morning, Sarah decided to confide in Harriet. Over a cup of herbal tea at the local cafe, Harriet listened intently, her brow furrowed. They sat tucked in a corner away from the chatter of other patrons. Harriet was the kind of friend who would never sugarcoat the truth. She had been Sarah's companion through heartbreaks past, including Sarah's broken engagement nearly a decade ago. "Sarah, you have to trust your gut," Harriet said, her voice low yet firm. "If something feels wrong, it probably is. But I don't want to accuse him of anything without proof." Sarah replied anxiously, twisting her wedding ring. "He's under a lot of stress at work, and I know the baby is adding to his worries." Harriet sighed. "I get it. You don't want to start a fight or push him away. But you can't ignore the signs. Keep your eyes open." Over the following days, Sarah did just that. She paid attention to Richard's mood swings, the times he spent on his phone, the frequency of his late meetings. She noticed how he sometimes disappeared into the garage for phone calls. She began to wonder if he was truly just talking to clients. Each suspicious moment piled onto the next, forming a mountain of doubt. Yet Sarah struggled to confront him directly. Part of her was afraid of what she might discover. Another part of her worried about the baby needing Richard's support and their finances in order. But little did she know that her suspicions were about to be validated in a far more dramatic way than she could have ever anticipated. It was a bleak Wednesday afternoon when everything came crashing down. Sarah had spent the morning at her obstetrician's office for a routine checkup. The doctor, Dr. Amelia Green, had assured her the pregnancy was progressing normally, and Sarah felt a wave of relief. She thought about surprising Richard at his office with lunch and news of the baby's healthy progress. After all, maybe Harriet was right. Maybe they just needed a little reconnection, something spontaneous to remind them of the love that existed before suspicion took hold. Clutching a paper bag with Richard's favorite tuna salad sandwich, Sarah drove into the city and arrived at Allen & Myers. She walked through the gleaming lobby, giving the receptionist a polite smile. The smell of polished floors and expensive cologne filled the air. Sarah made her way to Richard's floor, a sense of anticipation coursing through her. She pictured the delight on his face when she handed him the lunch, imagining he'd embrace her, declare how thoughtful she was, and maybe they'd talk about baby names. But as the elevator doors opened, Sarah's heart plunged into her stomach. Standing by Richard's office door was a stunning brunette in a tight pencil skirt and a silky blouse, giggling as Richard gently brushed a strand of her hair off her face. They were so engrossed in each other that they didn't immediately notice Sarah's arrival. Sarah froze the blood draining from her face, her fingers gripping the paper bag like a lifeline. When Richard finally spotted her, he stiffened. The brunette's face twitched with surprise, and a subtle panic flickered in her eyes. "Sarah." Richard stammered, taking a step back as if the floor had turned to lava. What are you doing here?" Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She was paralyzed by the sight, by the unspoken truth hovering in the room. At last she found her voice. "I wanted to surprise you with lunch, but I see you're already occupied." The woman's nameplate on her desk read, Christine Monroe, and Sarah recalled Harriet mentioning a new hire in Richard's department. Suddenly the perfume Sarah smelled on him made sense. Her cheeks burned at the realization that it was this woman's perfume she'd detected on Richard's suit. Christine offered a tight, uncomfortable smile. "I'm sorry. We were just discussing a client pitch." Richard nodded vigorously, attempting to play along. "Yes, just work stuff." Sarah's eyes flicked between the two. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "Right," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling. Her gaze dropped to the lunch bag in her hand, which now felt like the cruelest joke. She turned on her heel and left, ignoring Richard's calls for her to wait. In that single moment, all the illusions, excuses, and rationalizations she had clung to were obliterated. The floor around her felt as if it might collapse at any second. She hurried back to the elevator, tears blurring her vision. The ride down to the lobby felt agonizingly slow, her mind reeling with questions. Was this a one-time flirtation or a full-blown affair? How long had it been going on? And most crucially, how was she supposed to protect her unborn child from the fallout of this betrayal? Sarah managed to make it home before the tears truly took over. She shut the front door behind her, slid to the floor, and sobbed as muffled screams of anguish escaped her lips. The baby in her womb stirred as if sensing her heart break, prompting her to cradle her belly gently. She realized that no matter how betrayed she felt, her first priority was to remain calm for her unborn child. Still trembling with fury and sorrow, Sarah forced herself into her office, turning on the computer to distract her mind. Within minutes, she found herself searching Christine Monroe's name on social media. There she was. Glamorous photos, multiple posts about late nights at the office, each one racking up likes and flirtatious comments. Sarah's stomach churned at the pictures Christine posing in chic outfits, always sporting that same indulgent smile. Nothing explicit pointed to Richard, but a few cryptic captions about office romance made Sarah's blood boil. That evening around 7:00 p.m., Richard's car pulled into the driveway. Sarah listened to his footsteps as he approached the front door. He entered the house, slowly setting his briefcase down, with a cautious thud, as though he expected to find the place torn apart. Gathering her courage, Sarah stepped into the hallway. The tension between them was palpable. "Sarah," he began, voice tinged with worry. "We need to talk." She crossed her arms protectively over her chest. "Yes, we do." They moved into the living room. Richard tried to take her hand, but she pulled away, refusing to let his touch dilute her anger. He sighed heavily. "Nothing's going on with Christine," he insisted. "She's a junior associate on my team. I've been showing her the ropes." "That's it." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Really? Then explain the perfume. On your clothes the late nights, the looks you two shared in your office. Does that all mean nothing?" He opened his mouth to retort, but fell silent, seemingly at a loss for words. That hesitation spoke louder than any confession. Sarah swallowed hard, tears threatening to surface again. "Look," Richard muttered finally. "I admit things got complicated. We spent a lot of time together on projects, had some drinks, maybe it crossed a line. But I swear it isn't serious." Sarah shook her head, the anger boiling. "It isn't serious to you because you have a wife and a child on the way. You can pick up and drop these little flings whenever it suits you. But do you have any idea what this does to me? To our family?" Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. "I love you, Sarah. I'm trying to handle a lot of pressure at work, and I messed up. But you have to believe me, Christine and I. It's not love. It just happened." Those words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. It just happened, as if betrayal was an accidental slip. Her tears returned in full force, but she refused to crumble in front of him. She took a shaky breath, determined to keep control. "I'm pregnant with our baby," she said, voice quivering. "I have no choice but to fight for us but you. You chose to destroy my trust. If we're going to get through this, You need to end it. Immediately. Richard nodded, though he looked more defeated than sorry. Sarah wanted to scream, to throw something, but she needed to remain as composed as possible. Her voice trembled with resolve. You'll have to prove to me that this is over, Richard. Otherwise, I'm gone. In the wake of the explosive confrontation, Sarah found herself seeking solace in the company of loved ones. She confided in her older sister, Diana Robertson, a pragmatic attorney who lived only a few miles away. Diana wasted no time inviting Sarah over for a Sunday brunch, hoping to offer both emotional support and legal advice, if it came to that. Seated at Diana's dining table, Sarah took measured sips of orange juice while recounting the events leading up to her discovery in Richard's office. She spoke of perfume, late nights, and the image of Christine Monroe's flirtatious gaze. Diana listened carefully, her expression grim. It sounds like you have enough to believe he's been unfaithful, Diana said at last, placing a comforting hand over Sarah's. But the question is, do you still want to fight for this marriage? Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. I don't know. I keep thinking about the baby. Growing up with divorced parents isn't easy. But I also can't keep living with this weight on my heart. Diana nodded. If you decide to separate, you should be prepared financially and emotionally. But if you choose to stay, he has to work for it. He must cut ties with that woman immediately. Later that same day, Harriet dropped by Sarah's house, bearing homemade lasagna and unwavering moral support. Harriet was incensed by Richard's behavior. How dare he put you through this, especially when you're pregnant, she fumed. Sarah shook her head, tears threatening once again. I feel so torn, Harriet. One moment I want to pack my bags and leave the next. I remember that I still love him. And then there's this baby. With a determined look, Harriet squeezed her friend's hand. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together. Meanwhile, Richard faced his own reckoning. His parents, Walter and Margaret Johnson, were old-fashioned in their views on marriage and family. They had always adored Sarah for her kindness and believed that once a man pledged his vows, he was to honor them. When Margaret learned of the situation through Diana's concerned phone call, she immediately summoned Richard to their cozy lakeside bungalow. Sitting in the living room, Richard tried to defend himself, but his mother's reproachful stare cut him short. Margaret spoke quietly. Richard, how could you do this to Sarah? She's pregnant with your child. Have you forgotten your responsibilities? Walter. A retired school principal removed his glasses and fixed his son with a stern gaze. We thought we raised you better. Marriage isn't just about the good times. It's about commitment, especially during hardships. Richard sighed. I know. I messed up and I regret it. But Sarah and I haven't been close for months. She's so consumed with the pregnancy and I felt alone. Margaret bristled. That's no excuse. You have to fix this. If Christine's truly out of your life, you must prove it. Otherwise, you'll lose Sarah and our grandchild before they even have a chance to know you. His parents' disapproval hit Richard hard. That night, as he drove back to the house, he shared with Sarah. He felt the full weight of the mess he had created. Regret gnawed at him, but so did a lingering question. Was his connection to Christine really something he could just bury? Behind the polished facade of Christine Monroe's ambition lay a tangled mix of emotions. Although she'd carefully curated her online persona, her personal life was far from picture perfect. She had grown up in a small town in Wisconsin, watching her father abandon her mother when she was only 10. Christine vowed to build a life of independence and success so she would never have to rely on anyone who might walk away. When she moved to the city to work at Allen & Myers, she was determined to climb the corporate ladder. She networked relentlessly, volunteered for demanding projects, and never hesitated to do whatever it took to stand out. In Richard Johnson, she found a mentor who recognized her potential. Their professional rapport initially flourished late-night brainstorming sessions, conference calls with high-profile clients, celebratory drinks after sealing a deal. Over time, the line between mentorship and personal involvement blurred. Christine was drawn to Richard's confidence, his laughter, the way he could make her feel seen in a sea of colleagues. She knew he was married, but at first she told herself it was harmless, just a little flirtation. Gradually she sought him out more frequently, confiding in him about her dreams and insecurities. Richard, feeling the pressures at home and work, lapped up the attention. Soon, stolen glances became lingering touches, and the occasional after-work drink turned into an intimate rendezvous. Yet Christine was no wide-eyed innocent. She understood she was meddling in another woman's marriage, but rationalized it with her own heartbreak. I'm not the reason their relationship is failing. It must have already been broken. Deep down, she realized she was repeating the cycle she'd witnessed as a child, someone bridging the gap left by a troubled marriage. But she believed she deserved a chance at happiness, even if it meant stepping over invisible lines. That Wednesday afternoon, when Sarah showed up unannounced at the office, Christine felt her world tilt dangerously. Richard's wife was younger and prettier than she'd expected, her eyes filled not just with anger, but also with raw pain. Christine had stood there, her heart pounding as Richard raced after his wife. She knew the fantasy bubble had burst. In the days that followed, Christine waited for Richard to reach out to offer comfort or reassurance. But he distanced himself, returning her calls, only to discuss urgent office matters. His manner was cold, efficient, and painfully detached. A part of Christine raged at the injustice. How dare he cut me off when he was an equal participant in this affair? Another part of her felt the sharp pangs of guilt. She imagined Sarah's tear-streaked face and the child growing inside her. One evening, Christine found herself alone in her upscale apartment, a glass of wine in hand. She scrolled through countless photos, rereading messages that once felt exciting. Now they stung with regret. She contemplated resigning from Allen & Myers, but her pride and ambition loomed. Why should she sacrifice her hard-earned position? Thus a storm brewed within Christine Monroe, a conflict between her desire for professional success, her lingering feelings for Richard, and her conscience nagging her about the pregnant woman she had wronged. Little did she know the next developments would force her to confront the consequences of her actions in ways she never anticipated. Richard Johnson found himself in a whirlpool of emotions. Each morning, he woke up beside Sarah, feeling the tension coil around them like an invisible rope tightening with every passing day. Her eyes, once filled with warmth and devotion, now bore a guarded gaze that reminded him of his betrayal. He tried to be attentive, waking early to brew her decaffeinated tea offering to drive her to doctor's appointments. But the unspoken accusation hung in the air. Work offered little respite. The once invigorating environment of Allen & Myers felt suffocating. Colleagues whispered about trouble in his personal life, and he couldn't escape Christine's presence. She still excelled at her job, commanding attention and respect from clients. When their paths crossed, an awkward silence replaced the friendly banter they once shared. He'd murmur a quick hello, avoid her eyes, and bury himself in spreadsheets or phone calls. Yet he was haunted by memories of her laughter and the closeness they'd shared. Richard's best friend, James Peterson, tried to intervene. James, who had known Richard since college, invited him out for a beer in hopes of getting him to open up. They ended up at O'Malley's pub, a dimly lit bar where the echo of clinking glasses and murmured conversations created a familiar backdrop. After a swig of beer, James leaned forward, concern etched on his face. "Rich, what's going on?" "You're a mess. Talk to me." Richard sighed heavily, rolling the cool bottle between his palms. "I messed up big time, James. Got involved with Christine, and Sarah caught us. She's pregnant, man." "What kind of person does that to his pregnant wife?" James shook his head, empathy and reprimand mingling in his expression. "I'm not here to judge you, but you gotta fix this. Sarah's a good woman, and you're about to be a father." Richard nodded, a wave of guilt washing over him. "I know. I love her. I felt like we weren't connecting and Christine was there offering some excitement. I never meant for it to go this far." "That's the problem," James replied softly. "You might not have meant it, but it happened. Now you have to choose which path you're going to take, and be ready to deal with the consequences." Consequences. The word settled heavily in Richard's chest. He thought about the baby, a tiny heartbeat that he had once eagerly anticipated hearing at every ultrasound. The idea of not being part of that child's everyday life terrified him. He imagined empty cribs and lonely nights in a half-furnished apartment if Sarah kicked him out. The vision stabbed at his heart. On the drive home, Richard pondered his options. On one side there was Sarah and their unborn child, a family that once represented hope and stability. On the other side there was Christine, dangerously appealing, yet complicated, the living embodiment of a mistake he could not take back. Perhaps if he truly ended it with Christine, he could salvage his marriage. But a sneaking question remained. Would Sarah ever truly forgive him? Richard gripped the steering wheel, his mind whirling with regret and longing. He knew time was running out. Every day he delayed taking decisive action, he risked losing the life he once cherished. A month passed, steeped in tension and guarded conversations. Sarah's suspicions simmered, despite Richard's half-hearted attempts to show he was done with Christine. The situation came to a head when Harriet introduced a startling question. "Are you absolutely sure the baby is Richard's?" At first, Sarah was offended by the suggestion, but Harriet raised an uncomfortable point. Richard's unwavering suspicion that the baby's due date seemed off. Indeed, Richard had once casually mentioned that he couldn't recall Sarah's exact last menstrual period date. As if the stress of the affair wasn't enough, the spectre of doubt about paternity cast a new cloud over their already shaky relationship. Sarah felt both insulted and fearful. She'd never been unfaithful, but the seeds of uncertainty had been planted. Caught in a storm of worry, Sarah decided to take control of the narrative. She approached Richard with a proposition, a prenatal DNA test. "Let's settle this once and for all." She said, arms crossed, defensively. "I have nothing to hide, and if it'll give you peace of mind, then so be it." Richard hesitated. On the one hand, if he learned the baby was indeed his, it might force him to face his guilt with no room for denial. On the other hand, a tiny part of him, fed by his own insecurities, wondered if Sarah had grown closer to someone else during their marital distance. The tension between them and the consistent presence of Harriet or Diana in Sarah's life gave him irrational twinges of jealousy. Eventually, he agreed. They went together to a specialized prenatal clinic recommended by Diana. The process was straightforward, a simple blood draw from Sarah and a cheek swab from Richard. The results would take a week, and those 7 days felt like an eternity, suspended in doubt. During that week, Sarah struggled with waves of anxiety. She knew she had been faithful, yet the test symbolized more than just paternity. It represented their crumbling trust. Every time Richard left the house, she braced herself for another betrayal. Every time her phone buzzed, she half expected a message from Christine, flaunting her hold on Richard. On day 6, Sarah and Richard sat in tense silence in the living room, replaying the last few months in their minds. She was picking at the hem of her maternity blouse, while he stared blankly at the muted television. Suddenly, Richard's phone lit up a message from the clinic, stating their results were ready. Heart pounding, they agreed to go in person the next morning. Walking into the clinic, they were greeted by a nurse with a sympathetic smile, as though sensing the gravity of the moment. They were ushered into a small consultation room. A doctor wearing a crisp white coat entered with a folder. She cleared her throat. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, the prenatal paternity test results are conclusive." She handed them a piece of paper. Richard scanned the words quickly, his eyes widening. He handed the paper to Sarah, who read it in equal shock. The test declared Richard was not the biological father. In that moment, time seemed to stop. Sarah gaped at the words, rereading them, the breath knocked out of her. She felt as if the floor gave way beneath her feet. Richard stared, disbelieving. Every ounce of suspicion he'd harbored suddenly flared while Sarah felt a surge of protest in her heart. "This can't be right. This is impossible." Sarah left the clinic in a daze, tears streaming down her cheeks. Richard marched beside her, his face a mixture of triumph and pain, as though he'd been both vindicated and mortally wounded. The drive home was excruciating. Neither spoke the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. As soon as they stepped into the house, the accusations flew. "What the hell, Sarah?" Richard roared, slamming the front door shut. "You said you had nothing to hide." Sarah, reeling, fought to steady her voice. "I don't know how this happened. I swear I wasn't with anyone else." "Don't lie," he snapped, tears brimming in his own eyes. "The test is conclusive." "Sarah, conclusive." She gasped, feeling the walls of her world crumble. Was the test faulty? Could there have been a mix-up at the lab? She struggled to articulate her confusion, but Richard's rage was relentless. "I stood by you," he snarled. "I tried to fix this marriage, even after my mistake. And now I find out you betrayed me." Sarah trembled, pressing her hands over her ears as if to block the harrowing words. "Richard, please. I didn't cheat on you. I can't explain the result, but I'm innocent." Richard gave a hollow laugh. "Innocent? You're telling me the lab made a mistake?" "That's far-fetched, Sarah." Overwhelmed and desperate, Sarah grabbed her phone and called Diana. Barely able to articulate the horror of the situation, within minutes Diana arrived and tried to mediate. Richard showed her the test results, his hands shaking. "It's legally binding, Diana. The doctor said it's as accurate as it gets. So either my sister is lying or there was a lab error." Diana studied the document, her eyes narrow. "We need a second opinion. This result is too bizarre. Sarah swears she's been faithful." Richard snorted, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. "Sure, get another test," he said. "But I'm not sticking around to see how this soap opera ends." Sarah's heart shattered as she watched him pack. She wanted to beg him to stay, to trust her. But what words could she possibly offer now? She was as perplexed as he was. As Richard walked out the door, an icy realization settled over Sarah. Not only had her husband possibly ended their marriage, but her child's paternity was in question, and she had no logical explanation. She sank to the floor, Diana rushing to her side. Diana held her, stroking her hair. "We'll sort this out. We'll get an independent lab to verify. But for now, you need to rest." That night, Sarah cried herself to sleep, unable to shake the sense of betrayal from both sides, her husband's affair with Christine and his refusal to believe in her fidelity. Meanwhile, Richard took refuge at James Peterson's place, wrestling with questions he never thought he'd face. Who was the father of Sarah's child, if not him? And could there be any truth to her pleas of innocence? A week later, Sarah arranged for a second DNA test through a reputable lab recommended by Harriet's cousin, a nurse practitioner. The results wouldn't be back for another 10 days, leaving her in agonizing suspense. Her emotions swung between despair and determination. Each kick from the baby felt like a reminder of the child she loved unconditionally, even if the entire world doubted her story. Richard, still living at James Peterson's apartment, found himself torn. He tried to immerse himself in work, but the tension with Christine in the office escalated. She cornered him in the break room one afternoon, eyes filled with curiosity and concern. "I heard rumors about a paternity test," she said, setting down her coffee mug, "and that you moved out." Richard exhaled heavily. "It's complicated, Christine." Christine studied him for a moment, her brow furrowed. "Look, I'm not here to guilt you, but if you need someone to talk to, I'm willing." He gave her a tired look, recalling how her presence had once offered an escape. Now it just reminded him of everything unraveling in his life. "Thanks, but I'm fine," he said, turning to leave. During his solitude, Richard spent a lot of time reflecting on his marriage. Memories of Sarah's radiant smile at their wedding, the first time they heard the baby's heartbeat, and the countless moments of shared happiness haunted him. He'd betrayed her first, yet now he felt equally betrayed, his trust shattered by a lab result. Still, a small voice whispered, "What if she's telling the truth?" Unsure of what he wanted, Richard called Sarah one evening. She answered, her voice subdued but laced with longing. There was a moment of silence before he spoke. "How are you holding up?" She inhaled shakily. "It's hard. The house feels empty without you." His chest tightened. "Look, I'm still angry and confused, but I'm open to talking. Maybe we can meet for coffee." Sarah agreed, her heart cautiously hopeful. They decided on a small cafe, Le Petit Rose, the place where they'd had their first date. The next day they sat across from each other, the gentle hum of other patrons providing a comforting background. Sarah broke the ice. "I appreciate you meeting me. I know things look bad, but I promise I've been faithful. I'm just as baffled by the test result." Richard stared into his coffee. "I don't understand, Sarah. If the test says I'm not the father, how can it be wrong? But a part of me wants to believe you." She reached out and placed a trembling hand over his. "I'll do as many tests as it takes to prove it. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even after everything." His eyes glistened with emotion. "I'm sorry for what I did with Christine. But this baby, if it's not mine, how do we move forward?" Sarah's voice quavered with desperation. "I don't have the answers yet. But can we at least try to keep communication open until the second results come in?" With a heavy sigh, Richard nodded. "Yes. But let's be honest, if the second test confirms the same thing, I don't know if I can stay. Their attempts at reconciliation were fragile, built on the faint hope that science had made a mistake. Yet lurking behind their forced smiles was the ominous question, what if it wasn't a mistake at all? The day the second DNA test results were scheduled to arrive, Sarah was a bundle of nerves. She barely slept the night before, pacing her bedroom, replaying every intimate moment with Richard in her head. There was no one else, she was certain of it. But how to prove what seemed scientifically impossible? Diana accompanied her to the lab, the same official building with sterile white walls and fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. A technician handed Sarah an envelope. She trembled as she opened it. Diana's grip on her shoulder tightened in solidarity. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The second test yielded the same verdict. Richard was not the father. The paper shook in her hands as she mutely handed it to Diana. The disbelief on Diana's face mirrored Sarah's own. "This doesn't make sense," Diana mumbled. "You've never been with anyone else, right?" "No, never." Sarah whispered, tears welling up. She felt trapped in a nightmare that defied reason. They returned to the car where Sarah broke down in sobs. Diana tried to console her. "We need to get a lawyer involved. Maybe they made a mistake, or the lab is confusing the samples." Sarah's tear-stained face contorted with anguish. "Two labs, two identical results. How is that even possible? Unless—" Her voice trailed off. Unless what? Diana pressed. Sarah's mind raced. Could she have had a rare medical phenomenon like chimerism, where her own DNA conflicted with the baby's? She'd once read an article about it. But that was exceedingly rare, almost unheard of. Still, she clung to that faint possibility like a lifeline. Diana, ever the pragmatic attorney, insisted on a meeting with a genetic counselor to explore any medical explanations. In the meantime, Sarah had to break the news to Richard. She dreaded the conversation, fearing it might be the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. That evening, Sarah found Richard waiting for her on the front porch when she got home, having sensed the results would arrive. One glance at her tear-streaked face, and he knew. She handed him the envelope, and a fresh wave of anger mixed with heartbreak contorted his features. "I can't believe this," he muttered, scanning the paper. "Two tests, the same result. You lied to me, Sarah. All this time playing the victim when you're the one." He stopped himself, as though speaking further might break him completely. She grabbed his arm, her own tears flowing. "Richard, I swear I didn't cheat on you. I don't know what's happening, but I'm going to find out. Please just give me time." He jerked away, eyes blazing. "Time for what?" "To concoct another story I tried to reconcile. I tried to believe you. But facts are facts." She sank to her knees, sobbing in the twilight glow that bathed the porch. "I'm telling the truth," she whispered desperately. For a moment, Richard hesitated, torn between compassion and betrayal. Finally, he let out a strangled sigh. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I can't do this anymore." He walked away, leaving Sarah crouched on the wooden boards, her heart cracking open. The only consolation, the faint flutter of the baby in her womb. Little did either of them know the biggest twist was yet to come. The rain had started just before dawn. Light at first, then heavier, soaking the city in grey melancholy. Sarah sat by the window, cradling her swollen belly, staring out at the wet streets that reflected a world just as muddled as her thoughts. A week had passed since the second paternity test had crushed her, with the same unbearable result. Richard is not the father. But how could that be? She hadn't been with anyone else. Not emotionally, not physically. The accusation alone had been an earthquake. The confirmation a landslide. Each day she had carried the weight of disbelief like a second pregnancy inside her. Her appetite had all but vanished. Her smiles were hollow, offered only to reassure Harriet and Diana that she was okay. But she wasn't. She was barely holding herself together. It was Harriet who pushed her to keep asking questions. If you're certain, then the science is wrong. And science doesn't like to be wrong. Find the flaw. That simple statement lit something inside Sarah. A flicker of stubborn fire. She wasn't ready to give up on her truth. So on a foggy Wednesday morning, she booked an appointment with Dr. Patricia Langley, a respected genetic counselor with decades of experience. Harriet insisted on going with her. You're not walking into that room alone. Not after everything you've survived. At the medical complex, Sarah clutched her file of lab reports, her heart pounding so loud it drowned out the sterile hum of the clinic. The waiting room was unremarkable, beige chairs, motivational posters about family health, a faint scent of antiseptic. But to Sarah, it felt like a courtroom, a place where maybe the truth would finally be heard. When they were called in, Dr. Langley greeted them with calm eyes and a firm handshake. She was in her early 50s, with graying curls tucked into a bun and a demeanor that inspired both authority and compassion. Sarah launched into her story 2 paternity tests, both negative. A marriage on the brink. A man who had cheated, but who also believed she had too. And a child growing inside her, now clouded by a question mark that no mother should have to endure. Dr. Langley listened without interrupting. Then she leaned back, fingers steepled thoughtfully. And you're certain there's no possibility of another biological father? Sarah met her eyes. Absolutely. I swear on my life. Dr. Langley nodded slowly. Then we explore other explanations. Rare ones, but not impossible. She began explaining something Sarah had only seen in a scattered few medical articles, confined placental mosaicism. In rare cases, Dr. Langley said, turning a notepad toward them, the placenta, the tissue we use for many prenatal tests, contains a different set of DNA than the actual fetus. So a test done on maternal blood or placental DNA can misidentify paternity. It's not the norm, but it's been documented. Sarah's breath caught. You're saying the test could be wrong? Not because the lab made a mistake, but because my body gave them the wrong sample. Precisely, Dr. Langley replied. The test may have measured genetic material from the placenta instead of the baby. Harriet leaned forward. Can this be proven? With further testing, yes. But the most definitive answer would come after birth from a postnatal paternity test directly on the baby's blood. Sarah felt a jolt of hope so strong it nearly knocked the breath from her lungs. Finally, something that made sense. Something she could fight with. She clutched her belly, her baby kicking softly against her hand, as if he too understood that a truth long buried was beginning to surface. The rest of the appointment blurred into instructions, what labs to visit, what tests to order, which specialists to loop in. But the final words from Dr. Langley echoed loudest. You are not crazy, and you are not alone in this. The next morning, with medical documents in hand and her heart pounding harder than ever, Sarah drafted a long message to Richard. She attached Dr. Langley's explanation, the case studies, and even a voice note where she tried through a cracked voice to explain the scientific possibilities. Then she waited. Hours passed, then a day, then 2. No reply. By the 3rd morning, Sarah's phone buzzed. A new message not from Richard but from James Peterson. I gave him everything you sent. He's reading it now. He wants to meet the doctor. Sarah could hardly breathe. Was this the beginning of a shift? 2 days later, Dr. Langley called her, her voice calm as ever. Sarah, Richard came in today. I explained everything again in person. He listened. Sarah's hands trembled. And what did he say? There was a long pause. He didn't say much, but he cried. That evening, Richard knocked on Sarah's door. She opened it with cautious restraint, wearing an oversized sweater and the same exhaustion she'd been carrying for weeks. He stepped inside slowly, as if unsure he deserved to. "I'm sorry," he said. That was all. But the way his voice cracked, the way his shoulders sagged under guilt and regret, told her it wasn't just a formality. It was grief. Grief for the way he'd accused her, for not believing in her when she'd most needed it, for choosing doubt over love. "I was wrong," he continued. "So wrong. I let my own betrayal blind me to your truth. You told me again and again, and I walked away." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She didn't move, didn't speak. "I know I hurt you," he said, voice shaking. "And I know this explanation doesn't erase that. But if you'll let me, I want to be here when the baby is born. I want to take the postnatal test, and if it confirms I'm the father, I want to earn my place again, as a dad. Maybe someday, as your husband." For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself to feel something other than sorrow. She didn't smile, but she nodded, slowly. "I'll let you be there," she whispered. "But Richard, this doesn't mean everything is fixed. We have a long way to go." "I know," he said, "but I'll walk every step of it." And as the rain continued to fall outside, they stood in the quiet space between the past and the possible future, not healed, not whole, but willing to try. Armed with Dr. Langley's findings, Sarah called Richard, leaving a voicemail and sending him a detailed email outlining the situation. She explained the medical anomaly and pleaded for him to speak to Dr. Langley himself. Days passed with no response. Undeterred, Sarah forwarded the information to James Peterson, hoping he could persuade Richard to at least consider the possibility. Finally, 2 weeks later, Richard showed up at Dr. Langley's office unannounced. His hair was disheveled dark circles under his eyes, betraying his own sleepless nights. The genetic counselor greeted him calmly, reiterating what she had explained to Sarah, that the paternity tests could have been compromised by rare placental genetic differences. She assured him that once the baby was born, a postnatal test would almost certainly confirm he was the biological father. Richard's world spun. Guilt washed over him like a cold tide. He thought of how he had humiliated Sarah, refused to believe her, and pushed her away at her most vulnerable. He realized the terrible irony he had betrayed Sarah. Yet he'd accused her of the ultimate betrayal, compounding her pain. That evening, Richard drove to the house they once shared. Sarah stood by the living room window, arms wrapped protectively around her baby bump. As he entered, she stared at him, uncertain whether to brace herself for more heartbreak or cling to hope. "I spoke to Dr. Langley," he said quietly. She explained everything. Sarah's eyes welled with tears, but she fought to keep her voice steady. "So you believe me now?" He nodded, anguished. "I'm so sorry for everything. The doubts, the accusations. I don't know. Angry. Confused. And all along I was the one who actually wronged you." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. You broke my trust, Richard. You and Christine. And then you left when I needed you most. He moved closer, hesitantly, taking her hand. I know. I don't expect this to be fixed overnight. But if there's any chance of rebuilding, of starting fresh for the sake of our baby, I'm begging for it. Sarah studied the desperation in his eyes. She thought of the endless nights she'd cried alone, the heartbreak she endured while pregnant. Could she forgive him? Could they rebuild their lives on the ashes of betrayal? I need time, she whispered. I need you to show me you've really changed. Richard nodded, tears in his own eyes. I will. Whatever it takes. In the months that followed, Richard underwent individual therapy to confront the root causes of his affair. They also attended couples counseling, facing their problems head-on rather than burying them under resentment. Christine Monroe requested a transfer to another branch of Allen & Myers, seeking a fresh start. Her departure cleared some of the tension at Richard's workplace, though the guilt would linger for both of them. Finally, the baby arrived, a beautiful boy. They named Daniel. The moment Richard held his son for the first time, tears of joy and regret mingled on his face. A postnatal paternity test confirmed beyond any doubt that Daniel was indeed Richard's child. It was a bittersweet vindication for Sarah. They weren't magically healed. Rebuilding trust was a gradual, painstaking process. Late-night arguments still flared old wounds, still ached, but a mutual determination to move forward for the sake of Daniel guided them. Some days they felt the old spark of love that had once brought them together. Other days they wrestled with ghosts of betrayal. Yet in their child's innocent smile, they found a reason to keep trying. And so their life carried on, not as the immaculate suburban fairy tale Sarah once envisioned, but as a more complex tapestry, woven from heartbreak, hard truths, and hope. They learned that marriage is a fragile thing, held together by honesty, compassion, and a willingness to fight for it, even when the world seems set on tearing it apart. Thank you for witnessing this roller coaster of betrayal, heartbreak, and unexpected redemption. Sarah's ordeal reminds us that even the strongest relationships can be tested by deception, doubt, and cruel twists of fate. Richard learned the hard way that straying from trust can unravel everything you hold dear. Meanwhile, Sarah discovered that love, though resilient, requires constant nurturing and unwavering honesty. If this story moved you or kept you on the edge of your seat, please show your support. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating real-life drama fiction. Your engagement helps us create more stories that delve into the human heart, exploring the full spectrum of love, despair, and second chances. Join our community. Add your thoughts in the comments. And together, let's explore the powerful journeys that shape us, one story at a time.